After I got back to the Bonita, I was busy getting everything ready for sailing, running the fridge for the sea storage and so on. As dust settled over the town and harbour, tugs forward and aft manoeuvred the deeply loaded Bonita around the bends in the canal, and we headed seawards on the first stage of our journey. Hundreds of people turned out and waved to us. It was a long, laborious business down in the engine room and entailed innumerable movements of engines. Full ahead to full astern, alternatively for several hours. I envied the officers on the bridge or on the deck who could see and exchange greetings and farewell with their friends on the jetties as we drifted slowly past the town. It was dark when we cleared the entrance, and the pilot left taking our last letters for home. The telegraph rang, full ahead, then full away, and the ship swung slowly to her course, lifting gently like some great animal waking from sleep as she felt the deep groundswell of the Atlantic. The night was dark, and the land soon faded into the blackness as we steered well south to avoid the danger of mines in the shallower waters. Shortly before midnight, flares were dropped, presumably from enemy planes, but well astern of us, and we did not come within their fatal radius. Through the night, we drove the engines at their maximum, working full speed in the hope of clearing the danger area during the hours of darkness. We were a Panamanian ship with a Hungarian captain, in effect an enemy alien, so we were not thought to need the protection of a convoy. Next day, we saw a dozen San Marlo fishing boats with sails strung in a long line. I thought they looked so pretty. But the mate, Mr. Warner, muttered darkly that they came from San Marlo, which was in enemy hands. All was smooth and calm, and I thought nothing more of it. We had taken up sea watches, and I was on the normal seconds watch of 4 to 8. On the morning of Sunday, the 25th of August, I came up on deck after my watch and was talking to Mr. Warner when we saw more of the San Marlo fishing boats. The second mate was also with us. "I don't like those fishing boats we passed this morning," the mate said, "and last night too. They were spying on us. What are they doing fishing here? The water's too deep and we are 300 miles out from the nearest land." He had hardly said this when there was a burst of firing for a plane that happened just overhead. It was 8:55 a.m. Within 2 minutes I was in the engine room, standing by the main engines, and I gave her all the speed I could, for I knew that our only hope of survival was to dodge the bombs. Herbert, the fireman, was in the stokehold, where he stood no chance at all if the ship were hit, and indeed there was little chance of survival even in the engine room. I called Herbert up and then Tommy, the greaser, to stand on the main platform by me. Hardly had I done this than vibrations began shaking the ship. Never had I known anything like it. The bombing at Portland had been bad, that this was 10,000 times worse. We got it all right, and I thought we must be hit as the vibration was so terrific. I counted 8 separate bursts of firing from the guns and bombs. All the lagging came off the pipes and fell like snow. The feeling was as if the ship were lifted up and dropped each time, with the bombs, the machine gun fire and the engines of the plane. The noise was terrific and magnified even more in the enclosed space of the engine room. In fact, with all the noise going on, the engines seemed almost silent. Flying debris hit the main water service pipe to the main engine, and scalding water began to gush out. The end of the speaking tube to the bridge broke off too. I had my ears stuffed with cotton waste to deaden the noise, but pulled it out to hear the captain's orders. None came through. We were on our own. I got the engineers to open out the fuel injectors and the main steam throttle, and then I pointed to the door. "Get out!" I shouted. By this time, some oil from somewhere was running down my face, and I could only see out of one eye. The engine was a hissing, bubbling inferno, and everything that could shake or bang rattled like marbles in a drum. The ship must be doomed. I knew that now. My duty was to keep the engines going as long as they would turn. For the rest of their crew, their chance of safety lay in being outside and getting to the boats. Tommy hesitated. Then he too went. And I was alone. Was this the end, I wondered, banged and buffeted in this inferno of noise and steam? It didn't seem like a good way to go. How many times had the plane bombed the ship? Was it 3? Was it 4? Each time she came and we were miraculously unharmed. I began against all reason to hope. Suddenly the noise of the bombs and the firing stopped. I heard a slight noise behind me and saw that Tommy and Herbert were back. I scrawled a chit to tell the chief the engine room water service pipe and the end of the voice tube to the bridge were damaged and I wished to repair them. It was 9:25 a.m. and it was all over. The plane had exhausted her bombs, finished her bullets and gone. Not a single bomb had hit us. It was a miracle, and one due in part to the brilliant seamanship of Captain Hartz, who held the ship steady on course, and then, as the bombers were ready to unload, had linked the bow away in time to avoid the bombs, putting her hard to port or hard to starboard so that they were always just behind. I thought perhaps it was also due to the fact that the engines were kept going so he could avoid the bombs. When it was all over, the chief came down and took charge of the engine room. The donkeyman came down with a bullet in his hand, which he'd picked up off the deck. After I examined the boiler and engine room for damage and seen to the pipe and tube, I went up on deck, and we all looked for bullets and bits of the bombs. The plane had been a large 4-engine bomber. They thought a converted airliner, so she could not turn easily and had to go about 5 miles, then take a huge circle and come back. Even though she came over us 4 times, flying just over the mast, not one of the 25 bombs she dropped hit us, although they fell within 10 or 15 feet of the ship. The water was all black, like ink where some had fallen. These were thought to have been mustard gas. The explosive bombs were different from the ones we had in Portland, as they detonated at a much greater depth, getting under the hull to blow the ship sky high. It was a marvellous escape. I went round with the captain and Mr. Warner to see the danger. One bullet had gone right through the deck sheet of the poop and hit the deck and the crew's quarters. Another had gone through the deck above our bathroom and made a long dent. Another had gone through the deck above the second mate's room, through the ceiling of his cabin, through his bunk, through his chest of drawers, and made lots of holes in all his clothes. We found the bullet in the bottom drawer, resting amongst his silk pyjamas. There were 2 kinds of bullets, one large and copper-covered, one small and steel. The port lifebolt was holed, and the bullets cut grooves in the iron decks and through the hatch covers. If we had had a gun, I think we could have knocked spots off her. The mate said, if we had taken to the boats, we could have had 300 miles to go, which at a rate of about 4 miles an hour would have taken 77 hours. We had a lovely new ship's biscuits in the boats, and I tried a bit of one, but I thought little of it. Sparks sent 3 radios. Being attacked! Being bombed and machine-gunned. Send fighters, quick! But they never came. After it was all over, the ship's cat and kitten came out and sat on the hatch, not minding a bit. The cat cleaned her whiskers, and the kittens played with a little bit of string. We felt like we were all a bit like that cat and kitten, I think with the relief of it. The mate wrote quite an account of it all in his diary, which was later published in the newspapers.
Our second engineer, Miss Drummond, she's quite a famous person, the only British seagoing woman engineer, and she was sent here by the ministry, just couldn't get another engineer to take on the job. And she's probably about the most courageous woman I ever saw, and she seems to be without fear or nerves, and she's good at her job and has an uncanny power over the engines, for which I wouldn't thank God, because, she gets 1/2 to 3/4 knots more power out of the same fuel in her watch than any of the others. And I once asked her, how she did it, and she said, "Oh, I just talk nicely to them. You can coax or lead engines to do what you want, but you must never drive them," which, of course, is just clear as mud. We had a hell of an attack on the second day out, more than 400 miles from land, and a big 4-engine brute went for us for 35 minutes, till all its bombs and ammunition were exhausted. All were most damnably close, and the noise was hellish as the guns, he had 2 in 3 turrets ahead and astern, kept going until near the end, when eventually they were out of ammunition or seized up with the heat. Besides Almighty God, we have to thank the coolness and skill of the captain, who had to judge every order in terms of seconds and never once made a mistake. Perhaps even more, that very noble lady, the second engineer. She took charge of the engine room and in 10 minutes had talked to those engines to such a good purpose that our miserable speed of 9 knots had risen to 12.5 and was still going up when she eased down at the all clear. That speed had never before been recorded in the ship's 18 years. It's only in the last few days that I've heard what happened down below in that ghastly half hour. She was talking to the chief engineer and me on deck in Sunday best uniform after breakfast when the alarm goes. She went at once and she took charge down there. After the first sound, which had flung her against the levers and nearly stunned her, she realised that there was little hope, and she told the engineers to open up the fuel injectors and began opening the main steam valve bit by bit. Then, calling the engine room and the stokehold staff, she gave the last order, pointing out with a long arm to the ladder, "Get out!" She gave them a chance for their lives, and stayed alone where she knew she had none. 2 cast iron pipes were fractured, electric wires parted, tubes broke and joints started, but her iron body and her mighty heart stood it. The main injection pipe just above her head started a joint, and scalding steam whizzed past her. With anyone less skilled down there, that pipe would have burst under the extra pressure. She nursed it through the explosion of each salvo, easing down when she judged from the nearest of the plane's engines that the bombs were about to fall, holding on for all she was worth to the stanchions as they burst and the opening up the steam again. If that pipe had gone, we would have stopped and we would have been all up. By getting the speed, it gave the helm a chance to move the clumsy hulk, and literally every second mattered in the swing. I saw her once during the action, when I had to dodge among the WT room and look down through the skylight, hoping to shout a few words to cheer her. She was standing at the control platform, one long arm stretched straight above her head, and her hand holding down the spoke of the throttles as if trying by a touch to urge through the pound of steam through the straining pipes. The face as expressionless as the bulkhead behind her, and a ghastly white in colour, was turned up towards the sunlight. But she didn't see me. From the top of her forehead down her face, completely closing one eye, trickled a wide black stream of fuel oil from a strained joint. That alone must have been agony. She had jammed her ears with oily waste to deaden the concussion, and then in a panic tore it out again for fear she would not be able to hear some vital order from the bridge, not knowing that connection with the bridge was out. She was about all in at the end, but within an hour was full of beans and larking about, picking up spent bullets and splinters. All around her, by the way, the platform was littered with bullets that had come down from the skylight. They still sweep them up every day.
A few days later, I was on watch at 5:30 a.m. when the fireman came to me and said, "British convoy." He'd been up on top for our jug of hot coffee when a big, homeward-bound British convoy had been spotted. We did not slow down, though I stood by and managed to peep out of the engine room porch to see the convoy. It looked lovely in the lemon sunrise, the great grey dragons like sheepdogs protecting the mixed collections of ships. We were so close that the commander was shouting through his megaphone, and I could see him from my port. "Are you all right?" "Yes," Captain Hart shouted back. "You're very tough," shouted the commander of the destroyer. They must have heard about us being attacked. The captain shouted back to them, and all was well. On the 12th of September, the story of our bombing raid had come out, and we were 3 days' wonder in Norfolk. Captain Hart and I were featured as the hero and heroine of the piece. Everyone was complimenting everybody else. Miss Drummond is one of the most competent engineers ever employed on this vessel, said Captain Hart. For my deeds aboard the Bonita that dreadful day, I was awarded the MBE and the Lloyd's War Medal for Bravery at Sea in July of 1941. My MBE was presented by King George VI, and what a day that was! But this was only one of many adventures that I had in my long, illustrious career.